Hello, we are Group 27 and we'd like to welcome you to our group presentation which discusses the bailout negotiation. On November 20th, 2010, Brian Lenihan, Ireland's Minister of Finance, received a letter from Jean-Claude Trichet, President of the European Central Bank, forcing Ireland into a bailout programme. Formal talks with the Troika, which consists of the European Commission, European Central Bank and International Monetary Fund, began straight away. These started on the 21st of November and ran through until the 26th. The bailout negotiations took the form of two main sides. The Irish government sought after help from Troika to overcome the financial crisis at hand. Brian Lenihan was Ireland's Minister of Finance at the time, and he had heavy involvement in the negotiation. The Irish government believed that the state could survive without external aid. The idea of a bailout was a last resort for the government, and they thought they could reach an agreement which would result in an alternative arrangement. The EC, ECB and IMF were monolithic, which meant that they worked together and were on the same side of the argument. A question arose prior to the negotiations that took place. This was if the negotiation was out of necessity or opportunity for the people of Ireland to overcome the economic downturn. It can be said that ultimately the negotiation came down to absolute necessity for Ireland to remain safe after the economic crisis. When the answer to the question was obvious, the Irish government needed to assess and evaluate their reservation point, which is the absolute highest amount they are willing to pay and the lowest outcome they are willing to accept. From here, a risk evaluation needed to be drawn to determine the impact that the negotiation could have on the country. The BATNAs needed to be determined to ensure that Ireland would not settle for anything less than their alternative options.
In discussing our chosen case, it has become clear that several important negotiation concepts are relevant to and can be elucidated by discussing the negotiation between the Irish government and the European Commission, the European Central Bank and the International Monetary Fund, a grouping that came to be known as the Troika. This negotiation had aspects which could lead one to perceive a more integrative negotiation. However, we feel that when assessed both in terms of the external context in which it took place, as well as the motivations of the respective parties, this negotiation ultimately constituted one with a greater distributive element. According to Zardes, distributive bargaining, also known as value claiming, refers to non-cooperative behaviour where one side makes significant demands and offers no or grudgingly few concessions. Odell states that integrative negotiations aim to expand rather than split a fixed pie, with threats and coercion generally avoided. Integrative negotiation involves the creation and discovery of joint gain. This was a distributive negotiation because it represented a win-lose situation where both parties failed to maximise their slice of the pie. Though the Irish government prevented Ireland's 12.5% corporation tax rate from being affected, overall it was not what they wanted. A bespoke solution was disregarded in favour of a more standard one, with a large loan accompanied by cuts to public expenditure and tax increases. The Troika ultimately succeeded in preventing the bankruptcy of the Irish state and any cancerous effects that would have had on other European countries, distinguishing this from a lose-lose situation. This negotiation was based on the single issue of Ireland's need for a bailout. There was little alternative to reaching an agreement because of the dire situation regarding Ireland's public finances. Ireland's best alternative to no agreement was weak, which affected their public negotiating position. The Irish government avoided acknowledging talks until Patrick Honan confirmed their existence. Negotiations were conducted in a cooperative style, with the Troika understanding Ireland's perspective on several issues, such as corporation tax. Ireland did not want to concede on this, as they felt it was vital to their economic recovery.
Both parties can be classified as interest-based negotiators, as reconciliation between interests was attempted, though there were also hints of a power-based approach from the ECB. An interest-based approach means the parties aim to learn from each other's needs and desires, which goes towards constructing a fair agreement which both parties see as a good deal. The Irish negotiators successfully steered Troika away from Ireland's corporation tax, which demonstrated a refocusing on interests over power. If the Troika had demanded this rate be changed using a power-based approach, Ireland would have had to agree despite severe reservations. In terms of problem solving, Irish negotiators, in particular Brian Lenihan, found that instead of being able to leverage human dynamics, such as the skills of individual negotiators against their counterparties, the economic reality largely dictated the terms of the agreement. The Troika represented a strong counterparty grouping in which the Irish government struggled to find weaknesses they could exploit. Bankruptcy was never a realistic option, and both parties knew this. Therefore, creative problem solving was not especially prevalent in this case. Outcomes of the bailout negotiation. Ireland is a small, open, liberal economy who joined the EU in 1973. Our government and bank representatives worked closely together during the 2010 bailout negotiations. This close, interdependent relationship gave way to the €85 billion bailout. This package was created to prevent all national banks from going into liquidation. Overall, the general outcome was that the national banks received a bailout from the EU IMF fund with an interest rate of 6%. This agreement salvaged the national banks in Ireland. However, the outcomes on the Irish economy were less than desirable, with increases in taxes such as excise duties and carbon tax, deductions in tax credits, pensions, general tax expenditures, and introduction of various other taxes. This introduction of the aforementioned sparked outrage as the economy was already brought to its knees as a result of the Anglo-Irish bank scandal. This negotiation was arguably a single-issue negotiation, whereby the win-lose effect took hold. From the Irish perspective, there were feelings that perhaps a more tailored solution could have been achieved without as much loss on their behalf. Ireland was bargaining from a position of weakness, as monetary help was necessary if they were to use the national banks of Ireland. That being said, the ECB was conscious of a potential collapse of the European banking system and wanted to ensure the stability of such. Due to the Troika wanting to protect the European banking system from a collapse, they had to persuade Ireland to accept a bailout. Ireland accepted the bailout on the Troika's terms, such as austerity measures, to repair the Irish public finances, making this a win for the Troika and a loss for Ireland. The deal was a fixed sum and considerably one-sided, making the negotiation a single-issue negotiation. The bailout a decade later. The effects of the bailout are still being felt a decade later, with much of the introduced taxes still in place. The banks are still in recovery, however, according to Hancock, the question of was it worth it still remains, as many banks are yet to assume a comfortable position. Thank you for listening.